Mr. Chairman, I'm Ferris Heindel. I will be representing Mr. Sheets in this proceeding. Attorney.
Respondents in these 5 cases were issued citations for alleged violations of Chapter 26, Section 11.5Z, pursuant to Punta Gorda Code Chapter 9A10. And if the Code Enforcement Board finds a violation, the Board may assess a fine and cost in accordance with Section 9A8. And while you've received some written materials regarding the constitutionality of the ordinance alleged to have been violated, determining whether or not the ordinance is constitutional is not within your purview. It should not be part of your determination. You don't have the authority to overrule City Council's decision to pass the ordinance.
Mr. Jackson, what does the city need to do to establish a prima facie case?
I'm sorry?
What does the city need to do to establish a prima facie case?
So again, Section 11.5Z is what's at issue here. And it provides that no person shall erect, display, wear, alter, maintain, or relocate certain specified types of signs in the city, which includes any sign which contains obscene language or graphics, and any sign containing fighting words or indecent speech, which is legible from any public right-of-way or within any public space, and which potentially can be viewed by children under the age of 17. If the sign in question included indecent speech, which under the code is defined as language or graphics that depict or describe sexual or excretory activities or organs in a manner that is offensive as measured by contemporary community standards.
How are contemporary community standards established in this case, and does the city have an obligation to establish those before we can proceed?
That is, I don't believe there's any definitions of contemporary community standards.
So you say the city does not have an obligation to show that they violate, that they go beyond the community standards when we, that's a very vague concept. I don't see how we can find a prima facie case until we can determine what community standards are. So there's no legal definition here.
What we say.
I'm not aware of one.
I mean, we're looking for you as help as our counsel.
I do not have a definition of what contemporary community standards are. That's you received a memorandum from the defense counsel representing all the defendants, or the respondents in all 5 of the cases. And the city's filed a motion to strike that.
For the record, David Levin, city attorney, and I'm acting in capacity as the city prosecutor. As you are aware, the defense counsel filed a memorandum of defense on behalf of the respondents in this case. The principal argument made in that memorandum was contesting the constitutionality of the ordinance that has been cited to be violated by the respondents. I filed a motion to strike, a memorandum of law in support thereof, presenting the argument that this is an administrative tribunal, and I also argue that it might even be a violation of the Florida Constitution for you to, as an administrative body, go beyond the scope of your jurisdiction and render an opinion and a decision based on your understanding or belief of the constitutionality of the ordinance.
As far as the memo is concerned, lawyers have to be very careful. Appellate courts are always saying if you don't make the argument in the lower tribunals, you waive them in the higher tribunals. Mr. Levin will verify that, I think, in all candor. So that's a standard protocol. Attorneys must and are always careful to make all arguments possible. So at the very minimum, I'd like for this memo to be part of your record so that any appellate courts, any higher jurisdictions would know that these arguments are made.
Whether the constitutionality of this case is relevant, whether I agree with the constitutional relevance of this case, it's totally irrelevant.
Is it possible that because many of us have read it, that it could be concluded that the memos contaminated the decision of the board?
Take the podium.
Are you whispering now? Are you not talking now?
Be guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Thank you.
Now, in order to do, officer, in order to do your duty as a police officer, you've got to fairly and apply the wording of these ordinances and their definitions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So some of my questions are going to be as to whether these wording of the definition were fairly applied, because it's the board here that's going to be making a decision based on the ordinance. You don't expect the board necessarily to adopt your version of what these words mean and say, do you?
I can only comment on what our instructions were, what our memos were, and what words in those memos were enforceable.
Okay. You
Probably the dumbest one here in the room, so I'm going to ask some really stupid questions.
That's very good, sir, because now we can just focus on the indecent language, correct? The council here doesn't have to even consider the definition of obscenity or fighting words in making their determination. Do you agree on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's look at the definition of indecent speech. Language or graphics that depict or describe sexual or excretory activities or organs in a manner offensive as measured by contemporary community standards. Now, in order to find that those signs are indecent, officer, counsel, that there has to be a finding that the signs actually depict or describe sexual or excretory activities or organs. Would you agree with that? That you have to make that finding?
Yes, sir.
Now, each word in, would you agree with me that each word in this definition is important? So,
I do not have a dictionary here with me, but I do have the city memo that says what we will enforce.
Mr. Chair, I object to being schooled in English 101. I mean, this is a total waste of time.
I don't want to waste your time, sir. Lawyers have
You're
to...
doing a good job of it.
Thank you.
Continue, please.
Let's take some words using a fuck. Words are, there are words that are commonly used with fuck that doesn't have any sexual connotation, like fuck off, what the fuck, fucking idiot. You don't think when using those words people are actually trying to get out a description of sex, do you?
Mr. Handel, again, if you don't mind, that was the board one, same time. I play golf, so I hear a lot of phrases using that term, but it's a phrase. It's not the signs that we're dealing with. It's the description, as the sign said, or depiction. Let's stick with the sign and the language on the sign.
And see, Mr. Chair, and since council is having a difficult time with the English language, the word offensive in the last line is where everybody's heading. So what the fuck may be offensive to most of the people in this room. It may not be offensive to the two bozos sitting here.
All right.
Your Honor, I move to disqualify this gentleman from this proceeding is demonstrating animosity toward counsel, prejudgment.
Send me the electric chair, Counselor.
No, I think he should be disqualified from this
Eject him.
proceeding.
Let's try to keep the personal comments down.
This gentleman here displayed what's exactly, when you interpret this thing, you don't just say, hey, was fuck you offensive? You have to determine whether fuck you actually describes sexual or excretory activities. Okay? It's just a phrase used.
Mr. Chair, again, I must strongly suggest that if the counselor doesn't have a direct question for the officer, that we proceed.
I have a lot of direct questions, sir. I'm just getting objections and interference from board members. It should be disqualified because they've already prejudged the case.
Your questions.
And exercise animosity. I haven't shown any animosity. Anybody in this room hadn't insulted anybody. I'm simply stating my case. A member should not sit on the code enforcement board that's going to insult an attorney representing the party or a party.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments on that.
I can explain why you don't have a prima facie case, if you'll let me.
Sir?
If you're going to decide it. So,
Well, that's, we'll
I'm just asking here. I'm not.
Board, if I can caution you, I think we've got some emotions flowing here, and to take a breath. We've got to remember that due process is important here. They need an opportunity to present their case.
The reason you don't have a prima facie case because there was no indecency on the sign. I'll explain that to you. It's not enough just to say, hey, that was a kind of an offensive word. That's why this carefully written. These statutes need to be followed, and you get a chance to interpret it over and above how the police interpret it, because that's what the appellate courts, that's what the judges will do. And apparently, counsel's not objecting to this argument that you get to interpret these words. Correct, Mr. Levin?
That is correct.
Okay, you get to interpret these words. You don't have to accept what the officers say. In order to find a violation, prima facie, yeah, fuck, you can be very offensive. Offends me. But when you hear it, they didn't raise it to get somebody aroused or display sexual. They say, well, it's a word of intensity. It's used commonly, intensity, in those examples I gave you. You not only have to find that, you have to find that the words describe sexual activities or organs in a manner offensive. You don't have to, the offense is just one of the words. Okay? Those are just words. They're not words used in this context to describe sexual activity.
Was there any attempt in the memorandum or in the training to refer to context that those words would be found objectionable? Or just the word itself, without any context, is objectionable?
Well, I will say that the F word has the power to insult and offend, and it's derived from a sexual meaning.
But I think it's important to look at what is obscene, right, and what is indecent, and what community standards are. There's no real clear definition. But I came back to two Supreme Court cases, which I looked at, and the first one was Ruff versus the United States, 1957. The court held that material being obscene depended upon whether the average person...
I know it's...
Please don't interrupt me, sir.
I'd ask, I would ask, board member Nicholson, you need to be fairly clear and open to what it is that you're reading from and what the definition is, and that is an obscenity case, not an indecent speech case. And again,
well,
I want to make sure
it doesn't speak only to obscenity or indecent. It speaks to community standards.
That case was an obscenity case, was it not?
All right, let's talk about Miller versus California, where Justice Berger, in the opinion of the court, said that the average person applying contemporary community standards.
Again, that's an obscenity case, Your Honor.
Well, it says community standards right in it.
It's a case interpreting in obscenity standards.
Well, let Mr. Nelson have his chance.
Yes, thank you. And further, it goes on to say whether the work depicts or describes a sexual conduct or expiratory functions, I have trouble with that word, as defined by state law. That's very similar to language we have here. It's almost identical. But what isn't included is whether the work lacks serious literary, artistic, or political, scientific value. Only if all three factors can be satisfied can the speech rise.
I think your point is, you've discussed this. The question is, do we have a prima facie case? And
I don't think the city has shown that there are any community standards.
I'd like to have a vote on the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
One objection, motion passes.
Is that correct, Mr. Levin?
Counselor, if you don't speak into that microphone, nobody's going to know what the hell you're saying.
I make record requests and go into the government offices and record video of my interaction with the people fulfilling the record request and expose the corruption. And because of this activity, the City of Punta Gorda made an illegal law 2 years ago, making it illegal to record a public official in their public place doing their public duty. They have trespassed me from everywhere. They have literally forced me into the streets to let people know of the corruption in Punta Gorda. Now the city's attempted to censor my protest speech by banning words and phrases it considers indecent. But these words express my depth of my anger and frustration with the government. And I believe it is my duty as a citizen to confront this attempt to take away our freedom of speech. It is not my fault I am in the street. It's your fault. You trespass me from everywhere. You have the right to free speech and press, and you are violating it. It's in the Constitution, and you are knowingly violating it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Weiner.
Mr. Sheets, your street address, please.
Your Honor, I'll object to that. That's.
Did you hear what counsel just said? You can't object to my question. Try and pay attention to what's going on.
Again, this gentleman's insulting to the attorney.
Oh, I'm not through. Believe me, I'm not through.
Go ahead and keep insulting. You're showing yourself on the record.
Mr.
Let's show a little decorum
Calm
here.
down. Yes.
Mr. Sheets, I'm going to ask one last time. Your street address.
Don't answer it.
On dangerous property and safe.
Privacy.
Do I get to cross-examine, or is he going to keep interrupting me?
No.
That's his job.
So you just say there's corruption in city clerk's office and the police department, in public works and everything else, and let it go at that?
Actually, 9 years of evidence on the Charlotte County Complex Facebook page. It's not a lie, it's real.
Wait a second. I'm sorry, but I live in Punta Gorda, and what's on Charlotte County's Facebook page doesn't affect me.
Mr. Weiner, can we focus on the ordinance itself?
But your 6-year-old grandson can walk around with fuck grandpa on his shirt. No problem. Sit down.
Mr. Chairman.
I understand that. We're getting to
The attorney typically stand up in court as a show of respect to the chair. That's why I stand. I've never had a judge tell me to sit down when I stood up as a show of respect. So.
Mr. Weiner, we just temper your conduct, please. Yeah, we can get on.
What is it? How do you want me to rephrase that question?
It has nothing to do with the interpretation of the statute, application of the fact. My question is very simple, and the answer is yes or no. The words you use on those placards, fuck you in other words, in your mind or in your intent or in your interpretation, do they in any way depict or describe sexual or excretory activities or organs?
No, it's not.
Thank you.
You're not aware that the word historically and even today refers to a sexual activity?
I did not use it as a sexual activity.
No, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking the word itself. How is that word defined in the word itself? What is the definition of the word fuck?
Actually, it's funny you say that. It's called flicken. It's from German. It means to strike. In fact, another definition is for unlawful carnal knowledge.
The nature of this type of case is an irreparable case. Meaning it's like the toothpaste is out of the tube. You can't put the toothpaste back in. And under statute 162 as well as our city ordinance, with respect to an irreparable violation, if you find there to be a violation and it was irreparable, under the statute in our ordinance, you can fine up to $5,000 per offense, and would ask that you consider it as an irreparable violation.
Make that happen.
What are you talking about penalties?
I am.
You're going back over the speech again.
Not really. I do want to point out something. You know, I'm seeing a distinct bias here. I get picked on a lot. So did my witness. There's Diddy. I'm seeing a bias here. And I think you ought to, say, hey, why don't we just do our job here, rule according to the law, let's pick out each word, let's not be biased.
I understand him wanting to protest. I just don't, I really can't understand you wanting to use those words. You don't represent me, because I wouldn't get out, if I want to protest, I'm not going to get out there and use inflammatory, what I feel is language. And it'd be a sad day in this country when a newborn just getting up, starting to walk, and his first words out of his mouth is F you.
Community standards represent this board. We are the community for Punta Gorda.
Motion to find that the citation is valid and the respondent did irreparably violate Chapter 9A, Section 9A through 9A hyphen 13C 8 and Chapter 26, Section 11.5Z of the Punta Gorda Code in order that the fine in the amount of $5,000.
Is there a second to that motion? No motion, no second to the motion? And the motion's flawed. Anybody else want to make another motion?
I'd like to make a motion, find that the citation is valid and respond to irreparably violate Chapter 9A, Section 9A-13C8, Chapter 26, Section 11.5Z of the Punta Gorda Code, in order that a fine in the amount of $1,000 be imposed.
Second motion.
On the motion, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Nay.
So what do we have?
4 to
We guess we have
4 to 3.
me,
Nay.
take a roll. Okay, Nora
Nay.
and Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Nay.
3 nays, 4 ayes. Motion carried.
What was Mr. Massey holding in his hands?
I'm just referring to my report. It fucked Punta Gorda trying to illegally kill free speech.
And was that, did that sign contain any indecent speech, as that term is defined by the city's sign standards?
Yes.
And specifically, what were the words on Mr. Massey's sign did you find to be indecent speech, as that term is defined in the city's sign code?
Well, so at this point, I've identified Massey. I've typed up the violation, the ticket, the $100 fine. And repeat your question, I'm sorry.
If the sign said, what the fuck, would that be a violation?
Yes.
Just like the other case I think you set through here, you're going mainly by the memo. You're not trying to make a determination as to whether those words depict or describe sexual or exploratory activities or organs.
I object to the form of the question.
I'm attesting to the fact of what we have in front of us, the memorandums we have been issued, and whether or not that sign violated the code ordinance. My opinion, I do not attest to my opinion or anything having to do with that.
But because this is a different defendant, a different plaintiff in this case, that I don't think the city has established any community standards for determining what is indecent. And for that reason, and they have an obligation to do that. And for that reason, I do think that it is not a provocation case.
Motion's been made, that the prima facie case has been established. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes with 1 negative vote.
He says, the right in this room to say, display what we want to say. The fundamental right protected by the First Amendment. My sign and protest was against the city's attempt to restrict the right was right down to politicality of speech. You cannot have a limit on political speech. You may not approve of my method of speech, but it's still protected under the First Amendment. I want my kids to have the right to express themselves in any way they want. It's all covered by the First Amendment. That is why my father and my grandfather served this country.
Mr. Massey, you heard the officer's testimony about you. Now, what were you yelling?
I was yelling for her to honor her oath to the United States Constitution.
Why is that important to you?
Because my granddaddy, as well as my father and my two stepdads, served inside the United States services.
The words you used on your sign, which says indecent speech, did you use language or graphics that depict or describe sexual or excretory activities or organs in your signs, in your opinion?
No, sir.
Do you have any intent to depict or describe sexual or excretory activities or organs in your protest?
No, sir.
Just a reminder again, this, we consider this to be a irreparable violation, so that the up to $5,000 per day fine will be applicable.
It's kind of sad to me that none of you have discussed my point whatsoever, whether any of these words, as used, there's not been a single bit of discussion whether any of the words as used depict or describe sexual excretory activities or organs. It's the use of the word, not the word itself, that this definition addresses. If it was just a word, it would have said, hey, you can't use the F word, you can't use the S word. No, it didn't say that. It said it leaves a decision to each case. And there ain't any discussion on it. These words like, what the fuck? Of course that's not alluding to sex. You know, to be a civilized society, to be a law and order society, a rule of law society, we have to go by the words.
Mm-hmm.
I had not one person discuss those words and whether these dirty little phrases fit that definition. Not one. It seemed like you don't even care. So, why are you here if you don't care to apply the law like it's written?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you here? What good are you doing in this society if you don't care to apply the law like written? So rethink this, Cleveland. Sheets cares. Matthew cares. They care about First Amendment rights.
Mr. Weiner?
Motion to find that the citation is valid and the respondent did irreparably violate Chapter 9A, Section 9A-13, parentheses 8, and Chapter 26, Section 11.5, parentheses Z of the Punta Gorda Code, in order that the fine in the amount of $5,000 be imposed.
$5,000. Is there a second to that motion? Is there a second to that motion? Motion is not carried. I will entertain another motion.
Make a motion, please.
Please.
Motion to, find the citation is valid and the respondent did irreparably violate Chapter 9A, Section 9A-13C8, and Chapter 26, Section 11.5Z of the Punta Gorda Code, and it is ordered that fine in the amount of $500 be.
Motion. And it's been seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Just something that Justice Harlan said in another case, that this particular four-letter word, the same four-letter word, is perhaps more distasteful than others of its genre, and I agree, it is a distasteful word. But it's often true that one's man's vulgarity is another man's lyric. And this is political speech. I mean, if they had a sign that said Biden sucks, or I want to give Biden the finger, or,
Doesn't quite
is this indecent? It's political speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the city has made the prima facie case that there's a community standard that's been violated here.
I still believe, from my view, that this board constitutes community standards. I do consider the way it was described. It wasn't like when I play golf. This was intended to express the sexual conduct. So I find it to be in violation of the ordinance. So we'll take a vote on the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye. Nay.